So the court agreed to take three cases, the three appeals that the president had filed here, or his lawyers had filed here in the Supreme Court. The first one is an appeal from lower court rulings that said that a grand jury run by the DA in New York, Cyrus Vance, could get records from Trump's accountants to investigate whether hush money payments were improperly paid. Now, you may remember that that's the case that produced that very colorful exchange from Trump's lawyer in October, who said no, because a president cannot be indicted while in office. He can't be subjected to any part of the criminal process, including a grand jury subpoena. And that's when Trump's lawyer colorfully said that even if the president shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, he couldn't be investigated. So that's one question. That's a separate issue here. Can a local grand jury, not part of the federal government, not Congress, subpoena records for a grand jury investigation of a possible crime? So that's the first case. And then the court took two other cases. These both involve what you were talking about, Nicole, which is the attempts by committees of the House to get their hands on documents from the Trump accountants and also from two banks, Deutsche Bank and Capital One. These are requests by three separate committees, Oversight, Financial Services, and Intelligence, and they say they want Trump records for a variety of investigative and lawmaking purposes. Now, you know, maybe it will be a once-in-a-generation decision about the power of Congress. I'm not sure whether it's going to be a once-in-a-generation about the privilege of the president. Here's why. None of these cases directly ask the president for anything. They are requests to either his banks or his accountants. Mm-hmm. Secondly, they don't involve any official act the president took in office. And thirdly, they don't involve any official business. So it's all his personal records, not a presidential power. So that's what makes these cases so interesting. But the court will hear the argument on all three cases in March, and of course, a decision by the end of June when the court wraps it up for this term.
Pete Williams, I wonder if you think, you've been watching this court longer than any of us here, if you think that it will be a different climate in that Donald Trump's two picks, and I'm sure that's how he views them in his eye, Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, will be ruling on a case that will really capture the president's attention, for lack of a better word. He's likely to be tweeting about it around the clock. Just your thoughts from watching this court. Have you ever seen a dynamic like that shape up?
Well, we saw Justice Gorsuch on the court and involved in some of these privilege cases involving the presidential powers. Remember in the 1970s when the Supreme Court said President Nixon was not immune from a subpoena for the White House tapes, William Rehnquist did sit the case out. But other members of the court did vote on that case. I wouldn't think that any of the current justices would recuse themselves. Rehnquist had worked in the Justice Department, and that's what complicated that. And that's not true of either Kavanaugh or Gorsuch. So, I mean, certainly the attention will be on them. But, you know, these are complicated questions that go well beyond this president about the power of the Congress. I mean, one big question here is, this is what the Trump's lawyers have said. Congress doesn't have the power to investigate. That's what the FBI does. That's what the executive department does. Congress can legislate, and it can subpoena when it wants something for legislative purposes. But to find out whether the president was money laundering or whether he was involved in hush money payments, that's not a proper use of the congressional power. So that's a big sort of fundamental question that cuts both ways, I think, for parties.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.